Okay, welcome back everyone for Parsha Insights, and we are very excited to start all over again. This is our third time through the cycle, at least in this configuration, on Zoom and in this virtual home of Torah study. And we've done any number of, well, over the years, kind of every year, I had the tradition that each year would have, in terms of the Torah study, the Parsha study, a theme to what we are studying. And we've done years in the past studying the Or HaChaim HaKadosh. We did a year here on Zoom where we were studying the Chatam Sofer and Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. We just finished a year of studying Midrash every week. And this coming year, I wanted to give myself a little bit of a challenge because I want to own this, and I want to really be honest with you. Midrash is very interesting, and Midrash is very easy because it's so interesting, because it lends itself to the ideas and multiple readings, and it's a very beautiful but easy way of looking at the Parsha. Not that should ever be disparaged, but I wanted to give myself a unique challenge this year, and let's see how long it lasts, because it is a real challenge. At least for me, it is a real challenge. We are going to be studying the thoughts of a rabbi who I imagine most of you have not heard of. His name is Rav Moshe Shapiro, and we will be looking at his writings, and we're going to be looking at some of his thoughts. But I wanted to explain where I came to his writings. He passed away in 2017. He was a contemporary rabbi living in Jerusalem, and he is the Rebbe of many of the well-known disseminators of Torah right now. I sat through one of his classes, a grand total of one class I was fortunate to learn in my life from Rav Moshe Shapiro. It was in 1995. And he was a very well-known teacher in Jerusalem, but he gave one public lecture every week. It was Thursday evenings at the Or Summit in Jerusalem, and it was a capacity lecture. You couldn't get in. It was impossible. There were assigned seats. It was impossible to get in. And one of my teachers had an in and was a regular. One of my rebbes in yeshiva actually would travel into Jerusalem every week. My yeshiva Jerusalem, Yeshivat Shalavim. And one of my rebbes would go in every week to attend this once a week lecture, and somehow he got access to a seat. It's like at the Bell Center, whatever it is. Sometimes you can figure out somebody's not going to be there. You have an extra seat. So he had an extra seat, or he had two extra seats, and so he asked me and another student if we would come along to attend this class. And of course, I jumped at the opportunity. And of course, studying in yeshiva outside of Jerusalem, anytime you have a trip to Jerusalem, that's a big moment to go to the big city. So we drove into Jerusalem, and I remember sitting in this class. Again, I was 16 years old, 17 years old at the time, sitting in this class and just taking it all in, because everything was so relevant. And he spoke in such a clear. My Hebrew at the time wasn't as strong as it is today. And he spoke in such a clear Hebrew. And I remember sitting next to people whose names I knew. I sat next to a rabbi whose name was Rabbi Akiva, well known. I believe he's South African, writer of Anglo-Jewish books. And it was an amazing experience. And to this day, I remember he talked about Kohelet, about Ecclesiastes. I don't remember many lectures from when I was 16, 17 years old. But at the time, he spoke about Kohelet, and he spoke about Ein Chadash Mitachat Hashemesh. There's nothing new under the sun. And he said, but what the sages teach, that there is something new under the moon. What it's teaching is that there's nothing new under the sun, but under the moon. And he went on this whole path of talking about nighttime, and why nighttime is the time of chidush, of novel thought, and so on. And just an entire class exploring that one thought of, when Kohelet says there's nothing new, what he's limiting is where there's nothing new. But rather, there are many spaces in life where you can have novelty, and you can have new thought, and you can have new creation. And that was his lecture in 1995. And again, I don't remember many other, but that stuck with me. So when I saw that there's a set of his writings available on the Parsha, I said, okay, I'm going to motivate myself to look into these thoughts, and they're all very deep and they're all very profound, and I hope it'll lend itself to sharing together and to studying together. So you ready to jump in? So we're going Bereshit, Genesis. We're starting at the very beginning. And there's so many topics that we could tackle right now when we're talking about Bereshit. There's so much. We could talk about the Garden of Eden. We could talk about the days of creation. We could talk about Shabbat. We could talk about Adam and Eve. We could talk about the snake. We could talk about the tree of knowledge. We could talk about Cain and Abel. We could talk about any of these things. But we're going to start really at the very beginning, which is the part where I have often in my own studies found myself shying away from. Genesis, those first moments. What was happening? What was being created in those first moments? So let's take a look. We're going to go right there to the very beginning. A very good place to start. Okay, so we're looking at the very first verses of Bereshit. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Bereshit, this is going to be our key word today. Bereshit presumably comes from the Hebrew word Rosh, at the beginning, at the head of it all. God created, in the beginning, God created et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, the heaven and the earth. Okay, good. Everyone understand? Got it? We know exactly what happened in that moment? Fantastic. We know absolutely nothing about what happened in that moment. This verse tells us actually very little when we think about it because of the next verse. V'ha'aretz haita tohu vavohu. And the earth was, what's their translation here? Unformed and void. So the first question that we have is, if the earth is unformed and void, what was verse 1? God created the heaven and the earth. So then what happened? And then the earth is unformed and void? But then what did God create if the earth is unformed and void? V'choshech al pnei tahom, and there's only darkness. V'ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim, and the spirit of God, or the wind from God as they translate it here, is sweeping over the water. Vayomer Elohim yihi or, vayehi or. God said, let there be light, and there was light. Vayar Elohim et ha'or ki tov. God saw the light, it was good. Vayavdel Elohim bein or vein achoshech. God differentiated between light and darkness. Vayikra Elohim la'or yom v'lachoshech kara laila. And God called day, the light day, and to the night he called, or to the darkness he called night. Vayihi erev vayihi voker yom echad. It was evening, it was morning, the very first day. Incidentally, there's a beautiful Rashi on this verse Yom Echad. It says Yom Echad, which is an unusual way of phrasing, because if you look at the later days, I didn't include this in the source sheet. If you look at the later days, it says Yom Sheni. Yom Shlishi, exactly, Philip. It should be Yom Rishon. It should be the first day. Instead, and in fact, they translate it a first day, but that's not what it says. It says day one, Yom Echad. Why doesn't it say first day? So Rashi quotes a fantastic midrash, which says Echad is meant to teach another lesson. It's meant to teach that God on the first day was Echad, was alone. There was nothing else, because the angels, the other celestial beings, were created on the second day. So in this moment, God is in absolute solitude. Therefore, it's Yom Echad. It's not only the first day of creation, it's the day on which God was one and alone. So looking at this Bereshit, what is God creating in the beginning? How does creation work? Is the very first thing that's created, is it light? What did light come from? Where did light come from? And if the first thing is light, why don't we start with verse 3? Bereshit. I could imagine a Torah that begins like this. Bereshit, in the beginning, God said, let there be light, and there was light. Or in the beginning, the land was desolate, and God created light. going on in this first verse, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. The commentators are struggling with, are dealing with, whether this is all just a way of getting to light. Is this a long kind of circuitous path of getting us to light, and from light all of life emerges? Or is there something else happening here? So what we're going to talk about is really based on the Ramban, on Nachmanides. And Nachmanides says something extraordinary. And this is what's going to propel our conversation today. Nachmanides says, Va'ata shma perush mikra pshuto nachman bara. Listen, we'll read it in English. Listen to the correct explanation of the verse in its simplicity. He makes it sound so easy. He says this, by the way, after rejecting Rashi and after rejecting Ibn Ezra and after rejecting other commentators' approach to it. He says, now we're going to talk about what it really means. The Holy One, blessed be He, created all things from absolute non-existence. Now, so that's called in fancy Latin ex nihilo, and in Hebrew yesh me'ayin. Yesh, they're from nothing. Created things from absolute non-existence. There was nothing, and now there's something. And now we have no expression in the sacred language for bringing forth from nothing other than the word bara, created. Everything that exists under the sun or above from non-existence at the outset. Right? That's a pretty radical claim that Nachmanides is making right now. Everything that exists under the sun was not yesh me'ayin, was not from nothing. Rather, instead, from total and absolute nothing, a very thin substance devoid of corporeality, but having a power of potency, fit to assume form and to proceed from potentiality into reality. Listen to what Nachmanides is saying. What did God create from nothing? He created this primary matter. It wasn't that one day there's nothing and then the next day suddenly there are trees and there's light and there's bread and there are people and there are animals. It didn't go from nothing to something. God created from nothing a thin, what do you say, a very thin substance devoid of corporeality. If anyone can help me say this better, I don't know. God created something. But what was it? It wasn't anything that we recognize, but rather God created an element, an entity, from which everything else formed and created. Primary matter created by God. It is called by the Greeks heli, or in Hebrew. After the heli, He did not create anything, but He formed and made things with it. And from this heli, He brought everything into existence and clothed the forms and put them into a finished condition. This is high-level stuff. What God created in those very first moments was, how would you say this, was the potential to create other things. God created this, I'm trying to put it in, what I want to say and what I hesitate to say because it's too base, but God created a type of celestial Play-Doh from which everything else could be created from that matter. God created this matter which didn't really have form or didn't really have physical anything. And from that created everything else. So the only thing that was yesh me'ayin, that was created ex nihilo, was this primordial substance, was this original substance. Everything else was created from that substance. So the only thing that fits under that category of something from nothing was this heli, this matter. David.
Helium, one of the very first atoms to be formed. I mean, I would go with hydrogen myself, but hydrogen, helium, those are the two real building blocks that everything came from.
Beautiful.
Not to tie it into the Big Bang or anything, that's a thing.
I see it in a similar way, that it's describing matter in some fundamental building block way, but I'm not happy with the Shemayim part of it, because I think there is a spiritual dimension to creation that Healy or subatomic or atomic particles doesn't address.
Yes, 100%. You're right to point that out, that we're talking, I believe that we're talking about what the Aretz, what's in the earth part of creation, but not the Shemayim part of creation. And whether this is describing helium or carbon or whatever is going to be at the core of human existence, that's what Nachmanides is teaching us in medieval times, that that's what God created and everything from that. Okay? And Rav Moshe Shapiro writes the following. He writes in explaining the section, all that God created, all that he produced, existence ex nihilo, of producing form. After this, everything that he produced. So there is no after this, it's just forming. God creates bara, Bereshit bara. God creates this primary, from that, everything else is formed and made. Created is reserved for that original helium. Okay, ready to move forward a step? Or if any hesitations? Once we've established, so creation then, just to read this for a moment, what's the essence of creation? The essence of creation, you could say, oh, we think God created everything. God created the world. God created everything we see. God created a desk and a pen and a computer and a camera, and everything God created is all God's creation. And when Nachman is saying, wait a second, use that word created with a bit more attention, because God created, God formed all these things, but what God really created was the primary substance that then would give birth to everything else. What God really created was potential. The essence of creation is about potential. Okay, yeah, Esther.
Yeah, I see it as God created the earth and the heavens, somewhat like a space, like a page that an artist would have, which is blank to begin with, and then the creativity comes out of the artist and creates whatever it's going to create somewhere. The space, but God made it, like you said, made the space so that we would have, or he would have, or something would have the ability to create all the other things like the grass and the flowers and the fish and everything else.
The word is evolution. Evolution.
Susan, what do you say?
The evolution of the world.
I'm not sure I understand the potential for many different things to exist and emerge from that. But I think evolution might be a slightly different concept, at least as I am.
It's creative. It's a very creative process, as Esther's saying. It's extremely creative, but it's an evolution. It just didn't pop.
Right.
It evolved.
It is still evolving, and it still is.
Yeah.
The idea is that this original matter, whatever we can think about it, and we can think about it as carbon, but the original matter, or whatever we want to think about it, the original matter is still there, giving us the potential to create more and more. We're still fulfilling the potential of creation. Let's go back to Moshe Shapiro, because he says the following about tohu vavohu. And Rashi says on the original verse, so we're looking at haaretz haita tohu vavohu. The earth was, and then these words, tohu vavohu. It's a very poetic, rhyming phrase, unformed and void. The earth is unformed and void. So what does that mean? So Rashi says these words, tohu, comes from lashon tema v'shimamon. Sha'adam toheh mishtamem al bohu shabbat. A person, it's astonishment. It's a wow. It's something that you have to step back and take in. It's not something familiar. It almost underscores that what God created was something that can't be understood immediately, or at least at face value. It's very difficult to understand. So again, Rav Moshe Shapiro, the point of Genesis of all things contains nothing but an element prepared to assume form, ready to emerge in actuality. That's the point of Genesis. The point of Bereshit is to create nothing except for potential. That's all Bereshit was there to do. When we are asked what we are in essence, we would need to respond that our true reality is the realization of potential. So now, speaking about the meaning of Bereshit for us, it's about realization of potential. God created creation. Genesis is about potential. We are about realizing potential. That's the leap he's making.
But
We
how,
are.
how do you move? What's the process that occurs from nothingness to potential?
Something.
I think in a way, assuming you accept the idea of potential, you still are caught in the trap of from nothingness came something. How did it happen? Saying that God created it
Yeah.
is sort of okay, but it's not very revealing.
Well, none of it is very revealing. I'll grant you that. The Genesis story and how we get there is not very, we don't know how God creates light. That's the first thing that's created. It says God created potential. And then what Nachmanides is saying, according to Rav Moshe Shapiro, is that from that potential, God created light. What that process is not revealed to us. And I don't know what that process is, but it's a process, and perhaps the understanding is that it's a process that can be replicated in lots of different ways if we can find out how to replicate it, or in lots of different areas.
Well, you have to have had the sun. The sun had to be.
This is before the sun. So the sun is created on day 4. We're only on day 1 here. We have light before the sun. What does that look like? And we're going to get.
Maybe we didn't know.
We're going to get to another issue in a moment. I want to move forward and hold on to your questions, because I think, and Peter, I hope we're going to. I hope we'll have some direction by the end, and if not, not. But well, at least we'll own up to it.
It's very interesting.
The ethics of our fathers says, with 10 utterances, the world was created.
Oh.
And what does it teach? For surely it could have been created with 1 utterance, but this was so in order to punish the wicked who destroy the world that was created with 10 utterances, and to give good reward to the righteous who maintain the world was created with 10 utterances. Okay, that's it. The teaching, and I don't want to get too deep into this teaching except for one detail. And the detail is, with 10 utterances, the world was created. The word utterance is the Hebrew word ma'amarot. What word do you see in there?
Omer.
See marot, bitterness in there. What else? What do people see in there?
Omer.
Omer. Speak. Omer. 10 utterances. And what? Let's go back to our first verse. What's the first utterance that you see here?
Let there be light.
And we know it's an utterance because we have the word Vayomer. And God said, let there be light, as the very first utterance. Okay?
So simple. So simple.
Exactly. So simple. In 10 utterances. The problem is, the only problem, there's a little detail that we're overlooking here, or perhaps we need to pay a little bit more attention. The only problem is that if you count the number of times it says Vayomer and God said in the story of creation, there are 9, not 10. It's only a little problem. And the Talmud is very sensitive to this. The Talmud in Tractate Rosh Hashanah says, Rav Yosef Amar Keneged Aser Tadibrot Shenemar L'Moshe Sinai Keneged Asara Ma'amarot Shebehem Nivra Olam. What are the Asara Ma'amarot? The Talmud says, Vayomer, Vayomer. They say, Vayomer de Bereshit Tisha Havu. There are only 9 of them. They say, Bereshit Nami Ma'amarhu. The word Bereshit is also an utterance, is also an expression of God. This is radical. That the word Bereshit is one of the things that God said. And if so, what is being created? So Nachmanides told us it's the substance, this Hili, I don't know. But it's the substance, whatever the Greek word is, it's the substance. The Sepharno, so here's my question. If Genesis is also an utterance, what did it create? So the Sepharno says, and others say this as well, the Vilna Gaon has a beautiful comment on this as well. Sepharno says, Bereshit, at the beginning of time. This is the first moment which is indivisible into shorter periods. There had not been a concept of time previous to this. There had only been unbroken continuity. So the Sepharno, Bereshit, the first of the utterances, so going back, Bereshit, God created. What did God create with the word Bereshit? According to the Sepharno, God created time. So before this, what was there? What gave birth to time? What happened before time?
Light.
Light seems to happen after time, and light needs to be able to travel from, as we know it, at least from one place to another. Without time, and we're going to see how Rav Moshe Shapiro explains this in his own words, but without time, there's no sense of space, there's no sense of, well, anything can happen anywhere, at any time. The idea that life happens sequentially, the idea that I can't be in 2 places at, what do we say, at one time.
Once, yeah.
Without a concept of time, I can. Anything is possible. Without the order of time, anything is possible. And Rav Moshe Shapiro, I think, here has a brilliant interpretation of miracles. And he says about miracles, he said miracles all have to do with suspending our understanding of time, with saying that time is not relevant for this miracle. Because as I think he says it in this passage, he says, we can imagine creation differently, meaning if time had never been created, if a person is in one place and needed to be elsewhere, he would be there. The process of traveling from here to there would be unnecessary. It takes time to get from one place to, but if there's no concept of time, then you want to be there, you're there, you want to be here, you're here. There's no idea. You could be in one moment in 2 different places, 3 different places, it doesn't matter. If time is the only thing that keeps us from being in more than one place, this defines the mystery of what we call kfitzas haderech. There are a number of times that the sages will tell us, well, how did Yaakov get from point A to point B so quickly? Kfitzat haderech. That's what a miracle is that he was able to overcome the limitations of time. You want to say that for me to get to Israel is a 11-hour plane ride? No, I'm there right now. What do you mean? I could be wherever I want. I don't need time to take me from one place to another. This is a miracle, he says. The situation changes without being subject to the order of time. In essence, this explains all miracles. When the nature of a thing changes, such as water transforming into blood, the underlying concept is the elimination of process. I love this. Through a process, any miracle can happen. Any of the miracles described in the Torah can happen if you assign a process to them. Water can become blood, no problem. There's a process of turning water into blood. There's a process of generating frogs, of procreating, of whatever. There's a process of getting that many frogs in that particular place. There's a process of splitting the sea that might involve some type of natural intervention, that might involve wind, it might involve trenches, it might involve, there's so many things we could talk about. So we can achieve anything through process. The concept of a miracle is the elimination of process. Through a process, everything in the world could transform into anything else. The miracle is in the immediacy of the change, in the omission of the process, in rising beyond space and time. I love this definition of a miracle because, and as well, our holidays all celebrate miracles. That's what the Jewish celebration is. We celebrate Passover, the miracle of the plagues, the miracle of the splitting of the sea. We celebrate Shavuot, the miracle of standing at Sinai, the miracle of the Torah. We celebrate Sukkot, the miracle of the protection in the wilderness. All these things are miracles. And yet, what's a word that we use to refer to our holidays? Zmanim. The times. The designated times. So on a day in which we're celebrating the suspension of time, and if we're saying a miracle is an elimination of process, where is it taking us back to? What other moment was there no process? Was there no time? Bereshit, at the very beginning. So every time we celebrate a miracle, we're celebrating a taste of what the world was like before we had to abide by the order of creation, which included time, which included process. Abby.
I think that that also connects to the first mitzvah of Bnei Israel being time, right, as a people with Rosh Chodesh, right? So that sort of the comparison that's often made between the beginning of the Jewish people and creation. So there's these two senses of creation. And I think it connects to that as well, especially with the Moed and the calendar and the time that has to be set.
And just to go back to Moed, as you mentioned, Moed is another way we refer to a festival. And what's the word? What is Moed? What does it come from? What's the Hebrew?
Aid.
Moed comes from a Hebrew word that means ya'ad, or that's ya'ad. Anyone know seen ya'ad? You would see this sometimes if you look up on the board at Ben Gurion Airport. You'll see there's a column that says ya'ad, and you'll see Zurich, Frankfurt, Paris, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles. In Hebrew, you'll see all those things. Ya'ad is a destination. The word moed comes from ya'ad. It's about going towards something. And that's part, I believe, that's the process, that's the creative process. That's taking potential and moving in a certain direction. And that's where Moshe Shapiro takes us next for the final leg of our journey together with him today, which is looking at this, looking at the verse in Jeremiah, which uses the concept of Bereshit, as assigned to the children of Israel. Israel Kodesh Yisrael LaHashem. Israel is holy to the Lord. Reshit Tevuato. So Reshit, Israel is called the Reshit. Ko Ochlav Yasham. Anyone who wants to eat or destroy Israel will be held guilty. Ra Tavo Aleim Hashem. God says, I'm going to protect the Jews. But what's special about the Jewish people? They're called Reshit. And as Moshe Shapiro writes about this verse, the utterance of Genesis revealed the concept that creation is subject to process. Genesis is the beginning of the process. And after the beginning, all things continue as the body follows the head. And to survive this profane creation, to survive in this world, to remain alive within it, we must cling to our beginning. We are called the Reshit. We are reminded constantly, the Jewish people, we are connected to that moment of creation, to that moment of potential, of Reshit. However, will see in our tradition that there's another concept of Reshit, and with this we'll conclude. There are two types of beginnings. In Isaiah, Magid mereshit acharit, I shall foretell the end from the beginning. My plan shall be fulfilled. I will do all I have purposed. So one Reshit is Reshit for achievement, going in a direction. My plan shall be fulfilled, understanding that God created potential, and that anything I see here, if I should hold something, if I shall hold this pen right here and say this pen is the fulfillment of creation, then I haven't understood creation, because creation is giving me the potential to move towards a destination, and the destination of life and the destination of creation is not for this pen to be created, but to move in a further direction and to go even further than this. And there's another Reshit. He saw Amalek, Vayarat Amalek, Vayisa Mishalo Vayomar. This is talking about the prophet, about Bilam. Reshit Goyim Amalek V'achrito Ade Oved. A leading nation is Amalek, but its fate is to perish forever. So what do you mean, Reshit Goyim Amalek? Aren't we the Reshit? Aren't we the Reshit? How can Amalek, our enemy nation, be called the Reshit also? So Moshe Shapiro says this is contrasting two beginnings for us. The first beginning proceeds towards a destiny. The second does not proceed towards a purpose, for it perceives itself as an existing reality. It's almost a form of self-worship. I am what is created. God intended to create me. I am the fulfillment of creation. No, he says, creation is about proceeding towards a destiny, and the destiny is not something physical that I can contain in myself. In essence, since this beginning is not going anywhere, it's not really a beginning. That's what he says. It's not really a beginning. The beginning of Amalek is not going anywhere. Therefore, it's showing us a contrast that it's not really a beginning. The world is not the one we live in, he writes, or more accurately, not the world that we should be living in. It's false, and it will crumble. It crumbles before our very eyes. What we think is true is not true. We were created to focus on destiny.
Wow.
Yeah, but this is brilliant. I have to tell you, I hope you're recording it.
We are recording, and we will, as always, we'll put it up on social media, on YouTube. But I think, for me, this brought me back to Moshe Shapiro's classroom, and to say, okay, let's take a small concept, which actually is a huge concept, which can follow through so many different approaches to life and to Torah and to Jewish life. And that concept is, what was there before something was there? What was there before God created light? And what was there is something we go back to time and time again, the concept of Bereshit. It's part of our DNA, if you will, to be connected to Reshit, to the beginning. And the beginning is about potential, and potential that leads to destiny. That's it. The world is a process. Our creation is a process. And to think of our existence and the world and the physical world as the fulfillment of creation is to not understand why God created the world, and to not understand our mission within the world, which is to help move towards a destiny, to help realize the potential that was created in those first moments. So that's the very high-minded, I think, deep approach of Moshe Shapiro, based on the Ramban, based on Nachmanides' interpretation of what was created in that word bara, when God created. Nothing else was created. Everything else was formed and made. What was created was potential, and let's understand that in terms of realizing potential and moving towards destiny, always having direction in our own lives. So any questions or comments before we sign off?
Yeah, but something about the Lord at the very beginning, sweeping over the world and creating light. And I'm wondering today, where is the Lord today, that he's not sweeping over sweeping over the Ukraine, sweeping over all these people suffering in trouble. And where is the Lord now? What's the answer to that?
Susan, I love the question. And the only thing I can say to that is I am glad that I don't have the answer to that question, because then there would be nothing left to learn.
Oh,
That is
good for you.
the question.
Good for you. I'll tell my husband that. He'll use it often.
Good. The question is, what happened to that light? The light
Yeah.
that existed. This is not the light of the sun. This is a divine light, and our sages and the Kabbalistic writings have a lot to say about what the light of God was. That's a light that we try to access and maybe we see sometimes from afar, but it's a light that's not on the word is or, the Hebrew word is or. It's the same word that we use for light, but we're still a few days of creation away from the Me'orot HaGedol, from the large celestial lights, from the sun and the moon and the stars from being created. We're still far away from that. So the question is, what happened to that light? And the question is, God was hovering over the land, but what happened to God's presence? Where is it? So that's what we're striving to do, is to connect to God's presence, to connect to that light, and to connect to that first moment of Bereshit, in which everything was created, but nothing was created. The potential for everything that will ever be created was established in that one moment. So thank you all, and wish
Thank you.
It's
Shabbat
looking like
shalom.
it's going to be very, very inspirational for a whole season.
I hope. I can't wait. And next week we will be joined again by Rabbi Mark Fishman. Will come, so we'll have a tag team next week. So we'll see everyone then. And until then, have a Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.
A wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank
you very much, Rabbi. Outstanding.
Thank you.
Outstanding. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Rabbi.
Thank you. Well.